Hi, this is Lainey Cameron. I am so excited that I get the honor of hosting this poetry preview party for my good friend Chris Adler tonight. It's going to be so much fun. Chris is going to be reading. We've got some giveaways. We've got some special offers. It's going to be an absolute blast. So let me introduce, with no further ado, the woman of the hour, the moment. Her book is coming out. It's exciting. Chris Adler. So Chris is a writer and editor. I know many of you who are here know Chris well. I have this amazingly long bio here in front of me that talks about how her poetry has appeared in Cole, a poetry anthology, Inkwell, Penumbra, Tipton Poetry Journal, Bird and Moon. And it goes on. There's like 3 more lines. She's had a lot of poetry in different places, but this is really cool because this book actually won a competition. She won a competition, and that's why this poetry book is being published. So with no further ado, let me get Chris on here with me. Hey, Chris.
Hi, Lainey. Thank you so much for being here with me. And thank you to everybody showing up tonight. Thank you. Thank you for everybody who's here to support me tonight. My first collection of poetry. It's very exciting. And I'm so glad that you could be here to celebrate with me.
Yay. And for those who are watching, whether on YouTube or Facebook, if you can put some comments and let us know you're there. It's always weird when you're doing this. You never know, is anyone actually watching? Like, can you see us? So if you have a chance, put in a quick comment, say hi. And let me introduce our second person who's going to be joining us tonight. Well, actually, first, Chris, do you want to say anything to everybody who's here to see you before we get going?
Wow. I just want to thank everybody who reached out to me and shared the information about tonight's event and reached out to message or email or tweet congratulations to me. It's so strange for me to be in the spotlight. It's not something I'm used to. I'm usually helping other people, celebrate their books and cheer them on. So this is a whole new experience for me, but it's really great and comforting to know that my friends and my writing community and my family are all here with me to celebrate this really exciting event with me. So thank you.
We've got lots of great comments coming in already. Sarissa's here. She says, yay, go Chris and Lainey. Angela Terry Greenwell's here. She says, congratulations. Pamela Armstrong Stockwell's here. Jennifer Klepper's here. Stephanie Klippel's here. They all say congrats. They're all sending in comments. So it's exciting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yay. Carla says congrats too. So proud of you. So many great comments coming in here.
It's so nice to know I'm not going to be reading in front of strangers. It makes it a lot easier. I'm not one for public speaking, so I really appreciate all the people who are here. Thank you.
And let me welcome the third person who's going to be helping host tonight, Barbara. Hey, Barbara Conray.
Hi. Hi, Lainey. Hi, Chris. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, I would not have missed this for the world. Thank you for inviting me.
And Barbara's going to help interview Chris later. We're going to be doing a Q&A and finding out where the inspiration for these poems came from, which I'm excited to hear.
I'm going to ask hard questions. Hard questions.
Good.
I studied, so I think I'm ready.
Before we get going, there is a giveaway, right, Chris? We're going to pick a random comment at the end here before we wrap up. I'm going to help you with that. And what do they get? What if they stay on till the end and they comment or say hi or ask a good question?
We're going to draw a name at random at the end from anyone who's commented tonight, and they will receive a signed copy of my book when it releases in January.
Yay. Nice. And so I think the first thing we're going to do, Barbara, what are we going to ask next?
We are going to listen while Chris reads us a poem.
Yay. So I'll take Barbara and me off screen and we'll have you go for the first poem, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies. Okay. This poem is called First Love. Crossing the vast expanse of green at recess to ivy-covered fences, we'd stand strangely focused for an hour on the details of the flowers on the vine. Pulling the pistil down through the stem, we'd taste the honey, a single drop drawn from each blossom, then race each other back, past the swings and climbing ropes to the red brick building. We'd laugh, panting, faces flushed, while scents of grass stains, sweat, and honeysuckle rose up from our young skin, hot, like the sun that beat down on us at noon in that open field.
I love that poem. Chris and I have been talking so much about poetry because I am pretty new at the whole poetry writing and reading, and she told me something really interesting, and it's helped me to understand poetry a little bit more. And what she does and what she's teaching me to do is read through the poem twice and then read it out loud and just let it settle. Just let it settle in your mind and in your heart. And it has just been a wonderful experience. I've absolutely, thoroughly enjoyed Chris is teaching me all about poetry. So I've been very happy with that. And I understand we are also going to do a special giveaway. Is that right?
A special offer.
A special offer? Can you tell us about that?
Yes. Lainey, could you put up the slide and I'll talk a little bit about it? Okay, so if you have people in your life who you don't know what to buy for the holidays, consider giving the gift of poetry. Poetry is something, it's unique, it's different, it's not something that, you know, everyone is going to be giving them. And it's, at least to me, it's special, it's intimate. And if you would like to do that and buy gift books or gift book for someone in your life, and you order, and we'll put up the order information of where you can order. If you order a copy of the book, pre-order a copy of the book, which releases on January 4th, to give to someone, what we'll do is I will send you a bookmark, a gift card with a picture of the cover on it, information about the poem on the back, and I will autograph it. And there'll be space for you to write a note to your gift recipient. And then I'm putting it into a gift envelope for you to present to them. So they will know that come January 4th, there's going to be a book of poetry shipping to them, and they will have a handmade bookmark to use with it. And at the end of the event tonight, I will hold up all of those goodies so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about. And we'll put this slide up again for anyone who wants the information. And if you order 3 or more gift books, you will get a signed copy of the book for yourself, as well as a handmade bookmark.
That sounds fabulous. I love it. Are we ready for some questions?
We are ready.
You ready? You ready for the hard ones?
Bring it on.
You know, all those questions we talked about, I threw those away. We're doing a whole new questions. No, we're not. No, we're not. I love the title of your book, Undressing the Heart. I love it. And your first poem's about love. Is there a theme to the whole book? Is that how it became a book?
There is a theme to the book, but I did not set out to write a themed book of poems. That just happened to be a happy accident. The poems, the different locations where my poems have been published in the past that Lainey read at the beginning, those are, you know, I would submit 3 poems here, 3 poems there. And over time, I sort of saw a thread So I started to pull them all together.
So that's how the book came to be a book, just
Yes.
because you found all these poems and you found some that did have a theme to them.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Well,
theme is love. Is that right?
Yes,
The theme
yes,
is love,
yes.
which is, how beautiful can that be? That's just.
Well, and it's interesting because the poems were all written for different reasons at different times in my life. They were inspired by different people or certain memories and emotions that I'd had. And when I would start writing a poem, I would take a situation or a nugget of an idea, like a scenario or like a relationship situation, and I'd start to turn it around in my mind and play with it and start asking myself, what if? And then I would write about it from different angles and different viewpoints. And I would put in metaphor and some alliteration and other devices to try and form a full picture for the reader. And that's always how I've written my poems. And when I started to see a theme emerging in some of the different poems that I had published, I pulled them together and I realized that in the right order, that they worked in something like a timeline, and they explored different kinds of love that we experience throughout our lives, and as well as the emotions that will go along with that love: loss, regret, grief, resignation, and hope. But all of these feelings, like love, are universal and unavoidable. And when we undress our hearts is how I wanted, that's what I wanted the title to be, because that's what it feels like when we open ourselves up to love. We're opening ourselves up to that vulnerability that goes along with it. And I felt like at a time right now when society feels so divided in so many ways, it made me excited to be able to create something, a whole of a book that celebrates some things that we all have in common.
Right. And some things that we need to think about, especially now. You know what I find interesting here is the what if. And I find that interesting because there's so much about poetry that's just like, in a sense, to me anyway, writing fiction, like, what if this happens, or what if that happens? And to take you on the journey, whether you're writing a book or whether you're writing a poem. I find that fascinating. So that was, again, something new that I've learned, and it's just been a real journey for me. You've really taken me on a road trip here, which I've loved very much.
Oh, I'm so glad.
So when did you start writing poetry? How did this happen?
That's a good question. I started writing poetry when I was in graduate school for my creative writing degree, because it gave me a way to play with the language, which I already loved to do. I grew up, playing around with puns and wordplay and word puzzles. And I took piano lessons as a child, and I could read music, but I never really got good enough to write it. And most of the songs that I wanted to learn that my piano teacher wasn't really interested in teaching me, I taught myself by playing them by ear. I would pick them out on the piano. So when I was introduced to poetry, it gave me a way to create music with words, if that makes sense. So, for example, I'm going to read a few lines here. This is just something that I threw together for this example. The principal's thin stiletto steps, echoing up the high school's hall, were muffled by the rhythmic shush and thump of the custodian's broom. So, can you hear the difference between the first line, words like thin stiletto steps, and then towards the end you have the shush and thump of the custodian's broom, those deeper vowel sounds? That to me was like music, and because it was words, I was able to work with it and play with it and write it, which I couldn't do with music, actual music on the piano. And because at that point in my grad school training, I wanted to write novels and stories, but I wasn't yet skilled enough to write a whole novel. I used poems as my mini stories to write my mini stories. So I liken it to when you're learning how to bowl and you have those bumpers on either side of the lane. The guidelines of poetry and the shorter format helped me narrow my focus from trying to tell a story in 90,000 words to telling it in, between 100 and 200 words. So that's why I started writing poetry. It was sort of like practice for me, practice writing. And it also had that musical, lyrical aspect in the different words and sounds that I loved.
Mm-hmm. It's when you say it like that, it's very much like flash fiction, which I'm only beginning to learn flash fiction and to write it. And honestly, I thought flash fiction had something to do with like comic books, but it doesn't. It's actually, you take a story that's anywhere between 50 and maybe 1,000 words, and you make a complete story from the beginning, the middle, and the end in just that short amount of time. And I see such a similarity there. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree. And
it's fabulous.
And that's, yes, having that beginning and middle and end, that's the trick for me. I want to try and get all of those pieces into a short poem. That's a great comparison.
And the difference, I think, maybe in general with poetry is that there is sort of a lyrical part to it, which there isn't to fiction. So it just, you're actually on the same path, I think, whether you're writing poetry or you're writing a novel. I think there are so many similarities to it. And I think I've heard people say that if you write poetry, it's very helpful in writing fiction.
Yes.
And I'm beginning to see
my students. Yep.
And I'm beginning to see that. I really am. Next thing you know, you're going to have me writing fiction. I just don't know about that. So are some poems harder to write than others? Is it the poems in your book, were some of them harder? Were they written at different times?
Yes, they were.
Tell me about that.
So the inspirations for each poem, they all came from different places. Sometimes I'll get an inspiration from a place or a photograph or a song, or a situation that I'm experiencing in my family, or even an article that I read in the newspaper. The ones for me that were tougher were the ones where the inspiration came from situations and people that were very close to me. And I wanted to honor them and tell their story in a way, but I wanted to do it with dignity and with care. I didn't want it to seem, opportunistic. So the poem I'm going to read next was dedicated to one of my nieces, but it was actually written for my dear late sister-in-law, Kukla, and both of her daughters. I have never lost my mother. I'm very fortunate. I still have her in my life. And I've never had to worry that my children might have to grow up without me. I've never had, anything serious happen to me that was a worry. So it took some deep digging to try to understand what each of them might be feeling. And that's what I tried to do when I wrote this poem. The poem is called Excuse me. The poem is called Unearthed, for Sarah. As a girl, you used to paint low on the walls in corners of your room, tiny trees and flowers undetected. Soon boarding school called. I was left to rearrange the furniture, unearth your garden. We spoke later. You laughed at the standoffs that sparked those small rebellions. Such colorful pictures defiantly raised your young psyche. Yet you haven't outgrown the consolation of such things. Now 18, home from school, I hear you slip nights into the bathroom, the one I can't bear to enter for the mess, and crouch on the floor in the corner. Now, instead of producing, you peel the paper. Flowers fall off in little strips, leaving beneath bare blue walls. I knew my body would betray me as I aged, yet death is not the midlife crisis I had expected. But what I'm most sorry for is what my illness does to us. Strips me by layers of physical strength, peels you slowly in little emotional strips until all that's left is bare and blue. Yet you are the unlucky one. Soon my turn will come to go, but you will remain and be forced to rearrange, unable to speak with me about things you may happen to suddenly unearth.
That's beautiful, Chris. Just beautiful. It's so touching.
Thank you. That's one of my favorites.
It's beautiful. It's just beautiful. And apparently we're not the only ones that think that. We're getting comments here about the beauty of that. Can you tell me who your favorite poet is and why?
I am the first to admit that I am not a poet by trade, and I didn't read or study all of the great poetry masters. But there are two poets whose work I go back to over and over again. The first is Billy Collins. He served as the U.S. Poet Laureate from 2001 until 2003. And I discovered his work while I was still in graduate school, and he came to my school to give a reading. And I sat in the back and I listened, and his poems were so accessible, is the best way I can describe it. And they were poignant, but they were relatable. And this was a revelation for me that poems like this existed, that this was considered poetry, because it was so different from some of the classics that I had read. And I really connected with it. My second favorite is Ted Kooser, who also served as a U.S. Poet Laureate from 2004 to 2006. And many of his poems were inspired by nature, and he creates pictures of settings of a town, a way of living, and the places in his poems are so clear that I could picture them in my head. I could picture the snow and the fence along the farm and that kind of thing. And I loved that he could do this with so few words, and I wanted to try and emulate that as well. So just as when we write fiction and we need to create setting and story and emotion in our stories, good poets, at least in my mind, can do the same thing. I think that's part of what makes their poems so relatable. But with poetry, obviously, it's more challenging because you have less space to work with. So every word truly has to count. And I know a lot of agents and publishers and critique partners will say that you want to slash out the useless words. In poetry, you have even less wiggle room.
Yeah. How do you learn this? How do you learn to write a poem? Are there craft classes?
Oh yeah, you can absolutely take craft classes. There are masters, as I said, that you can study. There are rules for different types of poems, like simile and metaphor, alliteration, assonance, consonance, euphony, meter, rhyme. All of those tools that can include in poems, and tools that you can use to make a poem better and sound, lyrical or sad, etc. But there's also different kind of poems, prose poems, for example, which I never really got the hang of. My teacher gave us the assignment, and I did the assignment, and I handed it in, and he gave it back, and he's like, it's not quite what I was looking for. So try it again. And he gave me some feedback, and I tried it again, and I still didn't get it. So I decided at that point that prose poems were just not for me. And one of the lessons that we touched on in my poetry class was haiku, which to me is by far the most challenging to work with. I like to sometimes do that as a writing exercise. A haiku is 3 lines, unrhymed, 5 syllables, then 7, and then 5 on the third line. And so try to see how much you can say in that short little, frame. To me, it was the ultimate challenge when I was first starting to write poems, once I understood what they are, how they work, what you want to try to accomplish with them. And of course, my goal was to set up a story with a twist at the end that would hopefully leave the reader a little breathless.
Can you give us an example? I've never understood haiku.
Yes, I can give an example. And I think one of the things that makes haiku so powerful is because there are so few words, there's a lot that you try to sort of imply with the words that you choose. And then, essentially you're making the reader do the work, if you will. Okay, so here's
that.
It's interesting because it's hard work for the poet to be able to create enough information that you can hand it then to the reader and say, okay, take what you will from this, and see, what they bring, what they take away from it. So this is a haiku by Murakami Kijo. First autumn morning, the mirror I stare into shows my father's face. So haiku typically are not titled. They don't normally have titles like this one. Some poets will do it anyway. I've named haiku that I've written in the past. So to explain this one, I think if we think about, how you refer to stages of life as the spring and the summer and the autumn, and the spring represents youth, and middle age is summer, and the old age is the autumn of my life. So when this narrator in the poem first saw his father's face in the mirror that autumn morning, that it's likely when he realized for the first time that he looked a lot older than he felt. And because to him, he was a kid growing up, and his father has always been old, and compared to him. So now that aged face, that old face, is being reflected back at him, he sees rather than feels his own mortality.
Right.
and realizes that he's in the autumn now of his life because he looks like his dad.
And it's a scary feeling.
Truth.
Yes, right. We've all, well, I have anyway.
And we always feel, much younger inside, right? Than our true age. But
yes,
I think
absolutely.
the best poetry classes are ones that help writers understand what poems they enjoy and why. So then they can figure out what they want their own poems to do for a reader.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you've led me right to my next question, because what is it you're looking for your readers to get out of your poems? Like when I hold your book in my hand, which I cannot wait to do, what do you want me to feel? What is that going to give me? What do you hope it will give me?
I was going to say, well, hopefully, I discovered through reading Billy Collins, who I discussed before, that I love writing and reading story poems. That's what I call them, which they're not prose poems, they're story poems. And I that might just be my term. I don't even know if that's like an official poetry term, but I think of them like story songs, which I heard a DJ refer to not long ago. And I was like, oh, that has a name. So the songs that I grew up listening to apparently were called story songs. They're songs that tell a story. So for example, Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles, right? About all the lonely people and each one of them, where they come from, etc. Or almost any song by Simon and Garfunkel. But I think my favorite example is Ode to Billy Joe by Bobby Gentry. Do you know that song? I grew up listening to that. So, I mean, it's so singable. And all of those songs, I love them because they were rhythmic and they were lyrical and they were, pleasing to the ear with the sounds of the words, not just the notes and the music, but of the words themselves, right? It was the 3rd of June, another sleepy, dusty Delta day. I mean, it sounds like a poem, right?
Yeah.
But with these songs that really stay with me they also take that what if scenario, right? And then they use it to tell a story with the song and to evoke emotion in the listener and maybe even raise some questions. So the song Ode to Billy Joe does that. It's such a great example. It evokes the feelings of failed relationships, of unspoken heartbreak, of lost love, and of course the relentless march of time, regardless of everything we're feeling and suffering, right? And in fact, the story, the way it tells that and it conveys all of those emotions, it so captured the imagination of so many people, and it raised so many questions about the people in the song that it was actually made into a movie. That song was turned into a movie because enough people wanted to see the story play out on the screen, right?
Yeah, which is amazing.
Can you imagine? I can't even imagine. And I'm not saying that my poems are anywhere near as good as any of those songs or artists, musical artists. But for me, in a way, writing story poems became a sort of practice for me for writing women's fiction, because that's what I want my poems and ultimately I want my novels to do, is to make people think and make them feel all the feels and make them imagine the what if and make them wonder about, what isn't there? What aren't they seeing in my words that maybe, is implied? Is it really there? And just to make them feel and make them think. And that's the kind of poetry that I love to read. And that's the kind of songs that I like to listen to. And since I think of poetry as sort of written songs in a way, those story songs, trying to create those through poems, and do for my readers what those songs and poems do for me. That's really what I would love to be able to do.
And you touched on your fiction writing, and I'm just going to slip in here that I've been privileged to read some of your writing, and it is so beautiful. I cannot wait until everyone gets to read that book. It is one of my all-time favorites. I am looking forward to it.
You're my biggest fan.
Really, I am your fan.
Oh,
yes, I am. And I think you have lots of other fans. In fact, why don't we give them a chance to ask a question? Anybody who wants to ask a question, you can put it in the chat and I'll read it and Chris can answer it. So if you're thinking about something that you would like to ask, Allison Hammer, she says she's wondering what the biggest difference between writing poetry and fiction, and if Chris's poetry influences her fiction.
That's a great question. Thank you, Allison, for that. So the biggest difference is, and not all poems are story poems. You know, the haiku that I read before is more of a statement, right, of one person's situation or sudden realization. So you have these bursts of imagery, and that creates a moment, and then you have longer poems that may be lyrical and beautiful with the internal rhymes and the different sounds that you'll get in each of the words, but it might not make sense to a reader because whatever it was that the poet was writing, it was a personal message that they had either that they had written it for themselves, or it's just not clear. It's not spelled out, if you will, for the layman like myself who has not read the classics. So I really, not that I need to be spoon-fed my poetry, but I like to be able to read it and take something away from it, even though I'm not a scholar. But my poetry absolutely influences my fiction writing. I'm always looking for the word that will sound, more rhythmic, that has a more pleasing beat to the ear. And that's why I always tell my students and my people who I beta read for or critique for to read their sentences out loud, because sometimes I'll read a sentence and it to my ear, it sounds clunky, but you might not notice it when you're just reading the text on the page. So I suggest that people read it out loud so that they can hear it. And being able to pare down your story or your poem or your message to those few stanzas was a challenge for me in the beginning. And I had to, increase my vocabulary, and I had to, find different ways to portray images and emotions. And now I find myself doing that in my fiction, so that I'm not, beating the reader over the head with my message. I'm writing it in a way that I hope conveys, but doesn't, spell out for them what it is I'm trying to get across.
Well, I think you succeeded. Michelle Montgomery has a question. What poem in this book is the first one you wrote, and what prompted you to write it?
So I'm pretty sure the first poem in the book is one of the first, I think, of the collection. It's the first poem I wrote in my, poetry writing years. And what inspired it? So when I was in 5th grade, and I don't know if he's watching, when I was in 5th grade, I had a friend who was a boy, and our elementary school had a big field outside that we would go to at recess. And, kids would play baseball or, kick balls around and run around and play tag and stuff. And he and I discovered that the far back fence at the end of the field was covered in honeysuckle flowers. And we would spend our lunch hours out at the end of the field picking those flowers and pulling the pistil through, and we'd have that little drop that we would taste. And it was such a little kid innocent thing, and we were surrounded by the smell of honeysuckle and the heat of the day right at noon. And it was just, I don't remember a lot from my childhood because my childhood was a very long time ago. And I was kind of a scatterbrained kid. But what sticks with me are situations that made me feel something deeply, because the feeling is what I remember. And through that feeling, I can conjure up the scene itself. And I wanted to take that feeling and that scene in my head and try and put it into a poem. And, it starts the book, which is about love. And because it's called First Love, it sort of has that, you have the heat of the sun, you have the sweet nectar of the flowers, you have the, this, just the two of you, running and doing these things together and no one else is around. So it sort of hints at more adult love that will come, but through these young eyes, it's very innocent, and it's just to have fun and enjoy this magical thing together. And from there, love gets more complicated, relationships get more complicated, feelings get more complicated. So I wanted to start the book off with that fresh, young poem and feeling and grow from that through the rest of the book.
The beginning, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, exactly. Now Carissa has a question. Now that Allison read my mind, my new question, apparently Allison mentally stole Carissa's question. So we will talk to Allison about this later. But she says, when you are struggling with describing a setting or an emotion in your fiction, do you sometimes turn to poetry to help you with writing your fiction?
Oh, Sarisa, that's a really good question. See, now these are the tough questions, Barbara. You were telling me about it. I realized that they were.
You forced me to not ask the tough questions, but I handed them out to all these people.
That's a really good question, actually. And I can't remember specific instances when I have done that, but I can think of scenes that I wanted to write that really required a light touch. Like I didn't want to overdo it because of the emotion that I was trying to evoke in the fiction scene. I didn't want to just say, this is how it was. I wanted to create a scene and a feeling of tension or whatever it was, so that those emotions would come through on their own for the reader. And it would feel like every time I tried it, I was coming up short, or I ended up resulting in telling instead of showing. And if I took that situation and tried to write it as a poem, it would force me, it wouldn't remain a poem in the book, but it would force me to pare down the feeling I'm trying to convey to as few words as possible. And then I could use that and extrapolate a little bit or a few lines maybe, or it would spark another angle at which to, look at this scene and try and create this scene in prose. And it would help me to sort of nudge things along and untangle it from my mind and go at it from a new perspective. So yes, that is something I definitely do. I think I do it more unconsciously now than I did in the beginning of writing my fiction. I think it's become more of a habit, but yes, definitely.
Yeah, I would imagine. So Gabby Coatsworth says, do you write poetry longhand? Oh, that's a good question.
That is a good question. In the beginning, I did when I first started writing poetry, because it was a really, really long time ago. And when I was in graduate school, we had notebooks and pens, and the desktop computer was at home in the office. So I did start out doing it that way. And I think it did make a difference in, well, for one perspective, to have the feeling of a pen moving as you're writing these rhythmic words and you're trying to create a beat and a story. I think it adds a little something to your brain as a part of the process that helps it to, massage that that process that you're trying to use. Over time, I would write them longhand and then transcribe them onto the computer, and then I would fidget and edit them on the computer, because I don't like crossing out and I don't like erasing. I know that looks messy to me. So I would write things longhand and then put it onto the computer, and then I would do my editing there. But yeah, I think pretty much all of my poems start out longhand. Yeah.
Okay. I think we have time for maybe one more question if there's somebody that has a question, because I know we have another poem we want to get to. Anybody else with a question?
I think that's all of our questions, Barbara.
Okay, well, I know.
Already answered in Chris's earlier comments. But
Okay.
I think you wanted me to let you know who the giveaway winner is before we read another poem. Well, one of the questions was, can you please read another poem? So
we'll do one more.
So I thought we'll let you just read the other poem. But I think you wanted me to come on and announce who was the giveaway winner, who's going to get a signed copy of the book.
Yes.
Well, our random giveaway winner is Linda Simone, who's been putting some beautiful comments and congratulations and comments and thoughts that you'll definitely want to read after this, Chris. Some beautiful comments here for you.
Oh, thank you, Linda. It's so good to see you here. Or no, you're here. I can't see you, but yay. Thank you for coming.
And I think Barbara has one more question, so I'll let you ask that.
Yes, and that was, I know there is a special inspiration for this last poem, if you want to tell us about that and then read the poem.
Yes, I would. So this last poem was inspired by actually a combination of factors. First, a poet friend of mine asked me if I would write a poem for him that he could share when he was to be the guest host of a poetry website for a week. And he wanted to share a different poem each day. And he asked some of his poet friends, they would write poems for him. So, of course, I wanted it to be something meaningful and something that he would be proud to share, because he is a poet by trade. And the second factor that influenced and inspired this poem was that I had recently lost my father-in-law. And our family, and especially when my boys were very young, we spent many years visiting my in-laws' lake house in the Berkshire Mountains. And at the time, I was trying to find a way to support my mother-in-law and try to help her move forward with some feeling of hope. So I wrote this poem for her. January, Jack, for Lorna. On your birthday, I step out before sunrise to view the lake, the same as every morning since our final Saturday. I succumb to ritual as you did to pain. Let it become my keel, the core from which I measure just what color life is now. In the bluing air, reflected trees stand topsides down, knobby trunks lined, bases up like brushes hung to dry. On the quiet water surface, its black plate flushed with rose and lavender beneath the sprawling dawn, they paint a picture limned in memories and fog. I've passed a summer of blown dandelions and dead cicada shells. In autumn, leaves fell to earth like broken hopes. Kindly worded watercolor cards stopped coming about the time the dock's ladder began to gather rungs of snow. Today, I hear you through the grief. A veil of gray geese rises toward the sky. Backlit, they scatter like ashes. Their low, recurring call persists. Get on, get on. Its meaning seeps in by degrees like the dawn. A solid promise kept that day will come again. Finally, it arrives, a surprise, at once sudden and complete, to bear its beating heart, a golden hub of sun.
Oh, Chris, that's lovely.
Thank
You know, when you read a poem, I just want to be still so that I can just breathe it in. That's how I feel about your poetry. It's just beautiful.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
You're so welcome. I mean it from my heart. And Lainey, she has a job to do right now. She's going to put up a slide and talk about that, the special offer reminder and the slide.
Yeah, let's remind folks, because this is a really lovely opportunity to do something as a holiday gift for people. So Chris talked a little bit about this earlier, and in a minute we'll have her show you all of this because it's really beautiful. But here's the link if you want to order. It's bit.ly. It's also in the event invite. If you go to the Facebook invite, it had the link to purchase to pre-order your books, which will be shipping on in January. And if you order by the 6th of November, which is a nice fun thing to do next week, instead of focusing on the election, go order some beautiful poetry books before the 6th. And email your order. It's very easy. You'll get an email confirmation when you order. I already ordered my book. It comes back via email and tells you it's done. So just forward that to christine.adler@gmail.com. And you're going to get these beautiful, the card and the bookmark and the envelope and the sticker. Chris is going to show us all of those in a second. And also, if you order 3 or more, you get a handmade bookmark and your own signed copy, which is pretty amazing. And, you know, we're all trying to think of holiday gifts that we can send to people when we're not all together. This is actually a perfect remote gift if you need to send something, you want to send something important to somebody who you're not able to be with. So, Chris, why don't we put you on screen so that you can show us what all of that looks like?
Okay. So I like to think of my poems as a book of love that you'd be sending to someone that you care about for the holidays, someone who already has everything and you just don't know what to get them. This is something really different and special, and hopefully they would take a lot away from the poems and the sense of love that I tried to put into them, and that will be your gift to them. So the handmade bookmarks from my heart to yours, 2 little hearts. That would be the bookmark that I would send to you, and I would send it along with a postcard that has the cover of the book on the front, and on the back, a little bit about it, a blurb about it, and my contact information. I will autograph the card, and then I'll leave space for you to write your gift note for your recipient. Of what, you know, you let them know, to let them know that this is coming in early January, that this is their gift. And I will send them to you, and then you can put them into this little gift envelope so that you can present it to them directly yourself. And I'll even include a little love sticker that you can use to seal the envelope when you're ready to give it. So that's it. That's my little contribution and my little way of making your gift special to someone, if that's something that you would like to do.
It's lovely. It's
lovely.
Very lovely.
Lainey, I want to thank you so much for hosting this. Your your interviews of authors and parties that you've been throwing have made me so excited to read their books and so envious that everyone was publishing. And when this book came about, this poetry book, and I wanted to spread the word, and I hate talking about myself and asking people to buy things from me, I said, Lainey, I have to talk to Lainey. And it was just, I mean, you had so many great ideas, and you ran the technology for me. And I just, you helped me through how this was going to go. And I cannot thank you enough. And Barbara, your wonderful questions, you helped me to share everything I wanted to talk about with this book, and explain where it came from and how it was born and why it's so special to me, and hopefully let other people understand it too, so that they can get excited about poetry as well. Oh, Alex. And that was my friend Alex Lindquist, who is also a writer and designer, and she designed my beautiful cover for me. So you should go to the at least the invitation and take a closer look at that, because she did a beautiful job and photographed it for me. I am so lucky to be surrounded by such talented, generous, wonderful friends to celebrate this with me, and all of my family and friends who came out to celebrate with me. Thank you all so much. I can't tell you how much it means to me to have you all here. It makes me so happy in this horrible year. This is like the best thing that's happened to me all year. Really is.
I'm just so excited for you. And I'll just say, order the book. If you want to take advantage of the special offer, that's great. Get your friends to order the book. The biggest thing you can do for something like this is share it. So share it, do a post about it on your social media. It's an interesting thing in poetry world. Is it okay if I share a little bit of the difference in pre-orders, Chris? Absolutely. So in poetry world, which I didn't know, for those of you who are more familiar with books, in poetry world, pre-orders matter a lot. And in fact, the royalty that the poet gets paid, the author gets paid, varies depending on how many people pre-order. So the author actually gets a higher royalty if there's more pre-orders, and a lower royalty for less pre-orders. So the biggest thing you can help is not only order some books yourself, but also, share it with your friends as well. It's a lovely gift. And that offer that Chris just made, Chris, we should do a post about the offer that people can share. That offer, you can get your friends to take advantage of it too. It's not just people who are on the thing tonight, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Up until November 6th, as long as they follow those instructions and send them to me, I'll be spending the next couple of months in this, huddling down in the cold weather and crocheting heart bookmarks. I'm so excited.
There you go. Awesome.
That's fabulous.
That was so lovely, Chris. Your poems were beautiful. I was sitting here going on edge at every word. So Thank you so much for sharing this with us.
Thank you both.
They were beautiful. They were beautiful. As are you.
Who came out. Thank you. Mwah, I love you guys. Thank you, everybody who came out. This was wonderful.
Bye, everybody.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
In the comments.
Bye-bye. We love you.